Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Prince Automation Destination. Hope you are doing well. So today we are going to talk about an interview question which is very widely asked during the automation interviews, and it is the first question that generally interviewer ask in the interview, which is explain your test automation framework. And I have seen people struggling in explaining this test automation framework, even though they have good experience working in the test automation framework. So this is a art, I can say, of explaining the automation framework. So when an interviewer is asking about explain your automation framework, we need to be little organized. But what people generally do is they start saying things from here and there, and as a result of it, even interviewer is unable to understand what candidate is trying to convey or what candidate is trying to explain. Before we move on, let me tell you that for whom this particular session is going to be helpful and for whom it won't be helpful. So this is going to be helpful for people those who are already working in test automation industry and have good amount of experience, but they are struggling in explaining the interview. While it won't be useful for the beginners, those who don't have experience working in test automation framework, but I'll request both of you to take a look. It may help you at some level. So without further delay, let me dive deep into it. So what should be the steps or what should be the sequence that we should explain? So as and when interviewer asks you about the automation framework, first of all, we need to tell about the tool set that we are using. We need to talk about which framework you are using. So for example, you are using hybrid framework, BDD Cucumber based framework, TestND framework. So you need to tell about that and on which it is based out of. So the language which is backing this particular framework, for example, Java, and the which version of Java you are using, Java 17, Java 21, Java 8, and which build tool you are using, whether it is Maven or Gradle, right? You can talk about them. And coming to the automation tool, UI tool, I mean, then you can talk about Selenium 4 or Selenium 3, whichever you are comfortable in or whichever your framework is using. Okay, so this is the tools that you need to tell to the interviewer. Then starting with the build tool, because this is the most important thing that we need to explain. So I'll be explaining Maven in this particular session, and because I have widely worked in Maven, but Gradle is simple too, and same can be like same explanation can be implemented in Gradle as well. Only difference is in Maven we have pom.xml, in Gradle we have build.gradle. Okay, so we need to tell about pom.xml. What is the purpose of pom.xml? So this pom.xml is page object, not page object model, project object model. So what does it do? First of all, you need to explain about it is used to manage the dependency. It is used for the purpose of execution because it has plugin, for example, Surefire plugin, right? So these all plugins are responsible for different kind of things. Okay, then you need to tell about um, what is the structure of your Maven project, right? SRC main Java, you have one section, then SRC test Java is another. SRC main and SRC test, these are the two sections, and under SRC main we have further two sections, SRC main Java and SRC main resources. Similarly, for test as well, we have Java as well as resources. Okay, so Java usually contain the Java code and resources usually contain the resources that are useful for the project. So for example, JSON file would be part of resource, and let us say we want to read some external file that will be part of resources, right? So these are all falls under resources. Okay, so as a tester, we mainly deal with SRC test section. In Java, we usually write the framework, and in resources, we generally use the resources. However, we can utilize SRC main Java as well for writing the framework. Okay, but the test related part, runners, step definitions, these should be the part of the SRC test section. Okay, so now you need to explain about the layers. If you are using BDD Cucumber framework, if you are working on, BDD Cucumber framework, then you need to tell about feature files. And in feature files, you need to talk about like what are scenarios, how to write scenarios, what is gherkin, and then you need to talk about step definition, hooks, page object model, and runner. So if you're using TestNG or JUnit, you need to talk about the one you are using in your framework. If it is a plain TestNG framework, then you need to talk about test classes, different TestNG annotations, page object model, and runner. So for example, if you're talking about hooks in BDD Cucumber, so you should be aware about what is before, what is after, what exactly you are using it for, right? Now moving on to the next step that you need to explain. So you need to explain about the different packages. So driver manager is the important, where we manage the driver, like which particular. So generally we execute our test cases in Chrome, Firefox, right, Edge, depending on certain parameters. So for that purpose, we usually create one package, driver manager, and there we write some logic based on parameter. If it is Chrome, so we initialize Chrome driver. If it is Firefox, then we initialize Firefox, right? So we need to tell about driver manager. We have utilities is another package wherein you can talk about different utilities that you have. Then you can talk about pages as well. Pages is another package where we write the page object model. Listeners, if it is BDD Cucumber based, you can talk about step defs, that would be another folder, and hooks would be another folder, and runners, right? So these are the main important different packages that you need to explain. Apart from it, whatever you have in your framework, you can explain, right? So you can explain about different utilities. For example, you have screenshot utility, you have reading third party like external files, you have utility to read the configuration dot properties, right? Then coming to the data, so how you are feeding the data to the tests, right? So if you are using BDD Cucumber, so you need to tell about scenario outline, data table, and properties file. If you are working in TestNG, then you can talk about parameters of testng.xml, configuration.properties, and data provider is the annotation in TestNG which is used to provide the data to a particular test case. So you should be aware about whatever you are talking in the interview. If you are mentioning about at the data provider, so you should be confident on that, because as a candidate you only drive the interview. So then we need to tell about the important part of the framework, that is execution. So how you generally execute your test cases. So if it is a BDD Cucumber based framework, you can run it from feature files, you can run it from runners, and you can run it from Maven. And you should be confident on how this Maven is integrated with these runners, right? Likewise, if it is TestNG, you can run it through testng.xml. Then you can talk about, you can run it through Maven as well. So generally through Surefire plugin or Failsafe plugin, we do it. Now coming to the another important part, reporting, which people generally miss during the interview. The candidates. So we need to talk about the we talked about inputs, so we need to talk about the output, which is the artifact, important artifact that we should explain. So different reportings. So which reporting you are using? Are you using default report? Are you using extend report, LAO report? So whichever report you will be talking about, or which ever you want to explain, you should be aware about their configuration as well. So for example, for extend, we need extend properties file, right? So these kind of configurations you should be aware of. Then you can talk about loggers as well, which is another important part, right? At last, you can talk about features of your framework. So for example, you can talk about parallel execution if you're using any kind of design patterns such as singleton, factory, right? For example, factory for driver management, singleton for like a driver single instance, because driver is required single throughout the execution. And if you have any kind of thread safety in parallel execution, you need to talk about that as well, because that gives kind of confidence to the interviewer that the candidate is aware on these things. Then you can talk about failed test case execution. Do you have some mechanism to execute the failed test cases? and I retry analyzer to retry your test cases on the fly. If you have headless execution to execute your test cases in headless machine, if you have some mechanism to run your test cases on remote machines, Azure, AWS, or any kind of grid, right? Then whether you have screenshot utility, why I have mentioned this screenshot. So for example, if you have some provision to take screenshot on every step regardless of failure or past status, so we can mention about that as well. If you have external file reading capability in your framework, you can talk about that. If you have DB automation, if you have implemented some exceptions, so you can talk about all those features in this framework, features of framework, right? And at last, you can talk about integration with CI/CD, but be cautious. If you are comfortable with this CI/CD, only then mention about this Jenkins and GitLab. Otherwise, straight away say that you are not, you haven't worked much on this Jenkins and GitLab for CI/CD to execute your test cases on the remote machines. So at last, I'll say that this description or this introduction to the framework should be like crisp and short. You should be able to cover it within 10 minutes, from 5 to 10 minutes, and it should not be more than that, right? Because interviewer has to cover a lot more topics, so you should not like take more time. And uh, some important tips I can share. So you should mention only those areas where you are very much confident. If you are, for example, not confident on parallel execution, don't mention anything on parallel execution. If the interviewer will ask you like, do you have, does your framework has parallel execution, you can say yes, but you are not confident, right? But I'll say if you are going for interview, but the main thing should be you should be ready, you should be interview ready, and you should be aware on all the important things that is available in your framework, right? So these are certain tips which can help you explaining your test automation framework. So I have created one framework which is a kind of skeleton. I can share the same in the description section. So this is it for today. This is where I was feeling like people are struggling. So thought of sharing my thoughts with you. Thank you for watching. I would request you to please like, share, and subscribe my channel. Thank you once again for watching.